Well, our current series of messages, Working Faith, has us back in the New Testament book of James. The New Testament book of James. You know, while the smaller of the two testaments, that is, we spend the majority of our time in the New Testament. It's pretty simple. I mean, that's where we find Jesus. And Jesus changes and changed everything. So we spend most of our time in the New Testament. But of course, the Old Testament is still important. I like the Old Testament because I think the Old Testament so vividly demonstrates the relationship between God and his people. So take, for example, King Solomon. King Solomon, even though God promised to be their king, God's people wanted a king like the other nations. So God gave them kings. First there was Saul, an imperfect king, as all of us mere humans are imperfect. But nevertheless, Saul served to protect the people and establish an earthly kingdom for Israel. After Saul, there was David, imperfect too, but the one described as a man after God's own heart. And then following David, David's son, Solomon. And very early in Solomon's reign, God made a remarkable offer. We can read about it in 1 Kings chapter 3. God said to Solomon, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." And the implication is that he would. What a remarkable offer. Ask for whatever you want. What would we ask for? Air conditioning? Wealth? Power? Health? World peace? I don't know. What would we ask for? Solomon was king. He had power in most every earthly thing that he could imagine. But when the one who has everything, all power and authority, made the offer, what did Solomon request? Wisdom. Wisdom. He could have asked for literally anything, and he asked for wisdom. Verse 10 in 1 Kings chapter 3 says that the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. And that request of Solomon's makes it clear that Solomon already had a lot of what he had asked for, right? Because that was a very wise request. Yet Solomon knew that he needed more of this prize in order to fulfill his calling. Solomon asked for more wisdom. And God was pleased, so pleased that God gave him the wisdom that he asked for and so much more. Like I said, these stories in the Old Testament give us a vivid picture of what it's like, what the relationship is like between God and his people. And this episode ought to teach us that wisdom should be pursued and cherished. Wisdom is God's precious gift, a gift that we should prize, honor, and seek. Wisdom. And wisdom is the focus of the passage before us this morning in the last half of James chapter 3. In verse 13, James asks, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." All right, what about us, right? Solomon's request for wisdom is not limited to ancient kings. Each and every one counted among God's people should pursue and cherish wisdom. Wisdom. Over the years, from time to time, there have been those that have described me as wise. I know, it's kind of hard to believe, but it's happened. And I think it's among the highest compliments. I can remember early in my days as a university administrator, a few really important people to me, people that I respected, said that I demonstrated wisdom beyond my years. And it was wonderful to hear those words. I mean, those are words that I remember. Although looking back over the decades, I'm not sure that they were right about that. Nevertheless, I've been purposeful to pursue wisdom and careful to do all I can to make decisions and act with wisdom. The value of wisdom is emphasized throughout the book of James, starting with the very beginning. At the beginning of the book of James, in verse 5, you might remember from our series, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. James plainly says we need wisdom, and when we lack wisdom, we should, like Solomon, ask God for wisdom. Back at the beginning of our series, I offered this definition for wisdom. I said wisdom is insight to see things as God sees, and understanding to choose as God would choose for us. Wisdom, insight, and understanding. Insight to see things as God sees, and understanding to choose as God would choose. I think it's a pretty good definition of wisdom, especially the kind of godly wisdom we find in James. To live for God, to please God, and to demonstrate God's love, to demonstrate God's power and justice and righteousness in his world, we need wisdom. We need to see as he sees and choose how he chooses, and we need to act. Look at James chapter 3. James says, wisdom without works is dead. Well, that isn't what I have on the screen. That's the new Neary translation of James 3:13. Wisdom without works is dead. A loose translation, but I think it's a pretty good one. What James does say, you might remember, is that faith without deeds or faith without works is dead. Saving faith. We've been saying working faith, the faith that works, is inevitably accompanied by good work. Faith without work is not saving faith. Such faith is worthless, and the same is true of wisdom. Wisdom that's worth something, godly wisdom, is inevitably accompanied by good deeds. It says deeds done in humility. Deeds done in humility. Take note of that vitally important descriptor, humility. True wisdom is humble before God, right? Knowing that without him we are nothing. Acknowledging that he is the source and definition of wisdom. Humility. True wisdom is humble among people too, right? That wisdom's purpose is service, to help and love and promote and seek the best for others. It seems that James prescribes a sort of recipe here. Faith alone is dead. Works alone can be futile. Wisdom alone can be prideful. Even humility alone can be false and deceiving. But all mixed together, it produces something truly wonderful. It's like the chili we enjoyed in yesterday's contest.
I don't know if that produced things that were wonderful.
Well, come on now. We all enjoyed the chili. Now, I'm not going to disclose all of my award-winning ingredients. Since I'm preaching about humility right now, I won't make a big deal out of winning the competition yet again. But let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Would anyone just want the beans? How about a bowl of plain meat or a spoonful of chili powder? Bluck is right. Perhaps you saw what Roxanne posted on her Facebook last week. Did anyone see this? Yeah. I've done this. Anyone else? Have you tried it? Yeah. Now, disclaimer, this is not Roxanne handing over the cocoa. And it's not child abuse. The anonymous mom in the video said that the kid insisted, and I'm glad that she thought to record it and post it. Wait for it. There it goes. Is that awesome? Or what? There you go. Just as cocoa powder without sugar is gross, so is faith without deeds. So is wisdom without deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. Wisdom without deeds done in humility is just brown clouds being coughed out of our nose and mouth. Wisdom without deeds done in humility can be as bitter as cocoa without sugar. Verse 14 says, "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth." Envy and selfishness are the opposite of humility, right? Bitterly wanting something that someone else has is not humility. The Bible word for it is covetousness. There's a commandment for that one. Driven ambition for oneself is not humility. It does not care for others. Verse 15 says, "Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic." Notice the quote marks around wisdom. Such wisdom, it says. Now, those quote marks weren't there in the original Greek penned by James because they didn't use them like that then. But the translators served us well by adding them because there is a lot of wisdom that is not truly wisdom. And certainly not God's wisdom. Wisdom is earthly, it says. Earthly. A better translation might be earthbound. It does not regard God. It is bound to the limitations of meager humanity. It's base. It's the sort of self-centered, primitive stuff that comes from our lizard brains. It's animal behavior, earthly. It's unspiritual, it says. In my study, I found that the Greek word there is interesting. The word that's translated unspiritual is the Greek word psychikos. Sound familiar? It's psyche. It's the more sophisticated stuff that comes from our intellect and our emotions. It's unspiritual in that it is without the Spirit. It's the stuff that remains without God's Spirit. It's only supposed wisdom, untouched by God's Spirit. It says it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. You know, I'm probably too careful about not labeling stuff as demonic. You don't hear me doing a lot of that, do you? Calling out demons. It isn't that I don't believe in the demonic. I simply don't want to give the devil and his demons any credit for anything. Whether this sort of wisdom finds its source in the demonic or it merely pleases the devil and his demons, it's the opposite of that which pleases God. Wisdom, earthly, unspiritual, demonic. This idea of, quotes, wisdom as an imposter was not just a problem in the ancient context of the early church, that Greek culture. There are all sorts of imposters that persist with us today. Wisdom that is truly not wisdom. True godly wisdom is not like the imposter. So, for example, it is not power. Wisdom is not power. Because I said so, because I said so, should not be the motto of wisdom. Friends, it's often that the loudest and strongest voices are not the wisest voices. Wisdom is not power. It's not just knowledge either. Data is not necessarily wisdom. Yeah. With our technology today, we can quickly and easily access expansive and detailed knowledge. I can get it on my watch. Somebody really wants my attention. Oh, these are people talking about the baby. Data is not necessarily wisdom. With our technology today, like I said, we can get at it fast and copious amounts of it. But neither Google, nor Siri, nor Cortana, nor Alexa are wise. They know stuff, a lot of stuff. And based on news reports, apparently Alexa knows a lot about what's going on in your house. But they don't have any wisdom, just data. Wisdom's not power, it's not knowledge, it's not even skill. Ability, even extraordinary artisan level of skill, is not necessarily wisdom. Just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should, right? Wisdom is not credentials. Credentials. While degrees and certifications and such might be a good clue that there's some wisdom there, it's certainly not always the case. I have a graduate degree, I have ordination, I have various titles, all good things. They are proof that I've worked hard and passed some level of scrutiny, but it's not necessarily proof of wisdom. Wisdom is not credentials. Wisdom is not charisma. It seems that we so easily mistake attractiveness, beauty, popularity, personality for wisdom. Wisdom is not charisma. Wisdom isn't even age. While wisdom often comes with age, there are many old fools and many young people with gifts of insight and understanding. Wisdom isn't necessarily, I didn't look at anybody specifically when I said old fools. I was careful. I'm seeing a few people shaking their heads. I was careful to stare off into the distance when I said old fools. I did not look at my mother-in-law. She's having a good time back there. Right? Wisdom isn't necessarily age. Wisdom isn't genetics. Right? While there are traits of intellect and personality that are passed down from generation to generation, and family has a huge impact on the development of wisdom, sons and daughters do not automatically inherit wisdom. Again, not looking at anybody in particular. Wisdom isn't even in the majority necessarily. Now, the saying goes that there is wisdom in numbers, and that is often true. That's why we have juries. That's why we have panels of judges at the highest level of our courts. That's why we have boards and committees and such. But there is also the tyranny of the majority. Sometimes groupthink is not wise. Sometimes groupthink is not wise, but rather driven by fear or misinformation. Sometimes it's just driven by evil, right? Evils like greed or racism. Now, while wisdom is often accompanied by many of these characteristics, the majority, age, skill, credentials, knowledge, while wisdom is often accompanied by many of these characteristics, alone they are often imposters for wisdom. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. The imposters of wisdom result in chaos and evil deeds. With verse 17, we turn from what wisdom is not to what wisdom is. Verse 17 says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial, and sincere. Now, as you might expect, I intend to go through each of those characteristics. We'll consider each of them, but together, notice that they are predominantly outward focused. I think wisdom can easily be misunderstood as inward focused for the individual or even for, the group, whatever the group is. But these characteristics that describe wisdom are outward focused. They are all for the benefit of the other. So it says wisdom is first of all pure. It says first of all. And this idea of first of all indicates that the other traits that follow serve in a certain way to complete the idea of purity. First of all, pure, this innocence, this blamelessness. Now, of course, purity is a theme that's found throughout the Bible. Sometimes it's called holiness. In the New Testament, it is usually presented in the context of presenting believers, individual believers, and more often the church, the group of believers. In the New Testament, it's often this idea of purity and holiness is in the context of presenting believers as a pure bride for Jesus, as a suitable offering to God. Wisdom that is pure lives up to the high status bought for us by Jesus. Wisdom that is pure lives up to being labeled the people of God, being labeled a Jesus follower, being labeled a Christian. That's what this purity does. It's living up to that. Purity as a result of and in response to all that Jesus has accomplished for us. We don't see it in our English translations, but my study revealed that the original words in this list are poetic. There's alliteration and rhyming at play here. And that's interesting to me because even the sort of poetry and structure of the list reveals a wonderful beauty and completeness of it all. It's first of all pure, and then wisdom is peace-loving, it says. And that's an important one. I mean, we can even see it on the screen that this theme of peace is important since the passage closes by praising peacemakers. Wisdom is outward focused, striving toward unity. And peace-loving, of course, is the opposite of self-loving. Wisdom is considerate. Considerate. The word there has to do with the demands we place on others. Being considerate means that we'll yield to others, that we'll not extract harsh claims, even if the claims are due. Wisdom is considerate. This is an interesting one, too. It says, wisdom is submissive. Submissive. The meaning here is along the lines of submissiveness of thought. Submissiveness of thought. Other translations use words like open-minded or reasonable or open to reason. Wisdom is not stuck. Wisdom grows. Wisdom adapts. Wisdom even evolves, if you will. Wisdom results in us changing our minds from time to time. Wisdom is persuadable. It seems to me that some of the most unwise things that are said and done are rooted in a death grip on our positions. Right? We pick a side, we pick a position, and then we defend it fiercely, whether or not it is wise. Wisdom is submissive. Wisdom is persuadable, it says. Wisdom is full of mercy. God is full of mercy, and so should his people be full of mercy. Right? Jesus said it plainly. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." Wisdom is full of mercy, and wisdom is full of good fruit. Fruitfulness is another good way of stating that wisdom without deeds is worthless, and faith without works is dead. Fruitfulness, full of good fruit. I think that we often think that the most important part of fruit, right? It's fruit season, getting all that good fruit from Eastern Washington, and they've got great fruit up in BC right now. And we think of when we think of fruit, we often think of the best part of fruit as being that juicy, tasty flesh, right? But the truly most important part of the fruit is not the juicy, tasty flesh. It's the seed. It's the seed. Seeds are the part that is generative and reproductive, resulting in more and more fruit. Wisdom is full of good fruit. Some have noticed that this list here in James that describes wisdom is like the list in Galatians that describes the fruit of the Spirit. Right? Fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Some have noticed that the lists kind of bear some things in common. I think that the best takeaway from the comparison of these lists is that God works in and through us. That what God does in the lives of believers inevitably bears fruit. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit bears fruit. Faith bears fruit. Wisdom bears fruit. Wisdom is full of good fruit. Wisdom is impartial, it says. It is true regardless of person. And it says wisdom is sincere. It is true regardless of preference or position. Both impartiality and sincerity stand in opposition to the double-mindedness that James criticizes throughout the 5 chapters of this letter. Wisdom is true. It's unwavering. It's consistent. Wisdom is without hypocrisy. This is the wisdom from heaven. The wisdom we should pursue and cultivate in ourselves. And the wisdom we should expect from our leaders. It's been said that we get the leaders we deserve. And that seems true of all sorts of leaders, right? From presidents to pastors, from ancient kings to current CEOs. We don't always get to choose our leaders, but we often do. We often do. We vote. We choose where we work and how we go about our commerce. We elect pastors, again, for example, with our processes, or we elect them with our feet as we choose a church or another church. Leaders. I was thinking about it this week, because throughout the week I was keeping an eye on the biannual meeting of the General Council of the Assemblies of God. It's the big meeting of our fellowship that happens once every 2 years. This time it was in Orlando. Lori and I usually go to General Council to be part of the business, to learn something, to worship and be encouraged, and to reconnect with friends. We're often at General Council. But it just wasn't in the budget this year, neither in our personal budget or in the church's budget. So we missed it, and we really did miss it this year, but we hope to go back in 2021. But I was keeping an eye on General Council. And part of what happens at General Council is elections. It's a lot of elections, various representatives, and they were electing several of our executive leaders at this General Council. And as I watched the meetings online, I was driven to pray that God would give us wise leaders through the process. Right? Because various things often influence our votes in these opportunities, right? Sometimes it's just familiarity. We vote for the ones we know. Sometimes it's some sort of agreement with our pet positions. Sometimes we vote based on charisma. Sometimes we think in terms of skill or even diversity, right? It's like, it'd be good to have a woman there, or it'd be good to have someone from the West Coast there, or it'd be good to have a young person, or whatever it might be. And all of those things may be good, but what we need most from our leaders is wisdom. godly wisdom. I think we often choose our leaders for what we need now or might think we need tomorrow. But when things change, and guess what? Things change. When things change, and perhaps especially when things go sideways, what we need most from leaders is wisdom. Wisdom. So let's think about that the next time we have opportunity to select or follow a leader. You can ask, are they wise? Perhaps that's what should guide our choices most. Wisdom. Wisdom. And for our own selves, for our own decisions, for the actions that we take or the things that we say or post. We should ask ourselves, is this wise? Is this wise? Is what I'm about to choose or what I'm about to say or do, is it pure? Is it peace-loving? Is it considerate? Is it submissive, full of mercy and good fruit? Is it impartial and sincere? Is it wise? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had such a filter? I'd put that on my Facebook account, my Twitter account. I push the send button and then this big red flashing light says, is this wise? Wouldn't that be great? Maybe that's the work of the Holy Spirit. Finally, verse 18 says, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. The renewed emphasis on peace and peacemaking is a return to the outward-focused, others-serving fruit of wisdom. Peace and peacemaking stand in opposition to envy and selfish ambition. Even though the wisdom of this world is often contentious, it's often provocative, often divisive, often stirring up trouble, those who are truly wise, God's word says, are peacemakers. Peacemakers. You know, the wisdom, quotes, the wisdom of this world is often rooted in being right. But true wisdom results in a harvest of righteousness. Good deeds that are pleasing to the Lord that cannot flourish in contexts of anger, selfishness, strife, evil. Jesus again said it plainly. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." Peacemakers. Peacemakers. I think we're served well when we consider peacemaking in both the vertical and the horizontal. You know what I mean there? The vertical and the horizontal dimensions. We are called to peace in the vertical, peace with God. And we are called to lead others into that vertical peace, peace with God. And we're called to horizontal peace, peace among people. And the two go together, right? And I think we too easily neglect one in preference of the other. We too easily prefer one and neglect the other. So we might emphasize horizontal peace, peace among people, neglecting vertical peace, the peace with God that has eternal consequences, the peace with God that serves as the true and lasting basis for all peace, including horizontal peace. And we've often emphasized vertical peace, peace with God, neglecting horizontal peace, often at the expense of horizontal peace. Right? Too many atrocities have happened by all sorts of faiths, including the Christian faith, of course. Too many atrocities have happened and continue today as misguided fanatics pursue peace with God at the expense of others. But the two go together. The two go together. And these virtues of peacemaking and peace lead us well back to the Lord's table. It's that first Sunday of the month, so we do a couple of things on the first Sunday of the month. We wear name tags. Thank you for playing along. And we take time to come to the Lord's table. And these virtues of peacemaking and peace lead us well back to the Lord's table. It's here at the Lord's table that we're reminded that Jesus is our peace. That he made peace with God for us through his body and blood. He is our peace, the old song says, and it's true. And we receive it together. Right? Reminding us that we are charged to live in peace with one another and to sow peace. To plant seeds of peace, to propagate, to reproduce peace. We find peace with God and we receive it together, reminding us that we're charged to live in peace. So as we're going to come today, here in a moment, I encourage you to receive God's peace through Jesus our Savior. And let's commit to peacemaking. And let's pursue wisdom. Let's pursue wisdom. Perhaps you haven't been with us here at North Shore for communion. Just let me give you a couple of words of instruction. You do.